The veil did the fighting for 1,000 years. Iron Ridge never had to learn anything else. I understood that before the sun rose on my second day. I was standing near the wall, or what passed for a wall on the frontier, a packed earth rampart reinforced with timber and something older, something that hummed faintly when you pressed your palm to it. And Warden Ji Wol-yeong was already there, watching the dark thin out over the ridgeline. She had the posture of someone who had not slept and did not intend to complain about it. At her feet, half sunk in the churned mud, lay a broken spearhead, then another, then a third, a handspan further along, snapped clean at the shoulder where the blade met the socket. 3 blades shattered on one beast last night, she said without turning. 3. She wasn't speaking to me in particular. She was speaking to the fact of it, the way you speak to a number that refuses to make sense no matter how many times you say it aloud. The warden didn't hang me and didn't kneel to me. She did something worse. She handed me a problem. She turned finally and held out the nearest broken spearhead. I took it. The fractured surface was bright and granular, the particular sparkle of steel that had been hardened past its limit and given nothing back. I'd seen that surface before, in my grandfather's shop, on tools that came in from people who thought hardening was the whole of the work. I ran my thumb across the break, no deformation at all at the edge, brittle as fired clay. You mended the anchor, she said. Mend this, or mend nothing and be gone by the next moon. The frontier feeds people who are useful. I turned the blade over. The geometry was sound enough. Whoever had ground it knew what a spear point was supposed to look like. Then take me to whoever makes your iron. There was exactly one man in Iron Ridge who worked iron, and he did not want company. Baek Tae-ho's forge occupied a low building near the center of the settlement, close enough to the well to draw water, and far enough from everything else that a stray coal wouldn't take the town with it. Sensible siting. The building itself was black with years of smoke, the thatch replaced at some point with fired clay tile, a smith who'd thought ahead or who'd learned from a fire. The bellows were large, double action, well maintained. I noticed all of this before I noticed Tae-ho himself, which is probably the right order. He was a big man, not tall so much as dense, the way iron is dense. You could tell by looking that he would be heavier than he appeared. 40 years of forge work had done things to his forearms that no other occupation could replicate. He stood in the entrance of his forge with a hammer loose in one hand, and he looked at me the way a man looks at something that has wandered into his territory and not yet understood its mistake. My forge, he said, my fire, my iron. Outlanders keep their hands where I can see them. I kept my hands where he could see them. Ji Wol-yeong said something brief to him. I gathered she had already explained the situation, or her version of it, and then she left us to it, which was either trust or indifference, and I wasn't yet sure which. Tae-ho went back to work. I watched. His hands were a master's hands. That was the first thing, and it was important, and I want to be precise about it. He was not a bad smith. He was an exceptional smith working with an incomplete method, and the difference between those two things is everything. He read the heat by color with an accuracy that most men never develop. He knew when the iron was ready to move, knew how long he had, knew by the way the metal responded to the hammer, whether he was above or below the right temperature. That knowledge lives in the hands and the eyes, and it cannot be faked and it cannot be rushed. He had it completely, but every blade came out brittle as glass or soft as lead, and he'd decided the gods were done with him. Bad ore, he said, not to me, while a finished blade cooled in the quench trough and I watched the water stop steaming. Bad luck. The mandate's leaving the iron same as everything else. Nothing to be done. I looked at the blade in the trough. I looked at the quench trough itself, at the temperature of the water, at the color the blade had been when it went in. I looked at the rack where the finished blades hung, waiting to be fitted to halves and sent to the wall. He quenches and stops. No temper. That's the whole tragedy right there. He hardened the steel and stopped. He'd been doing half the work his whole life and calling the missing half a curse. With a man like that, you don't argue. You make something. 1 chisel each, I said. We cut stone. If mine breaks, I leave and never touch your fire again. He looked at me for a long moment. The hammer was still in his hand. Ha! It came out sharp, almost a bark. And when yours breaks, Outlander, then you've lost nothing but an afternoon. The calculation moved behind his eyes. He was not a stupid man. That was also important. He set the hammer down on the anvil face with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. He made his chisel first, and he made it well. Good stock selection, proper forging sequence, clean geometry. He quenched it in the trough with the confidence of long practice. It came out hard. He set it aside. Then I rebuilt the fire. I didn't ask permission. I adjusted the fuel, better charcoal, layered for airflow rather than packed, and I worked the bellows in a rhythm that fed the combustion steadily rather than in surges. The forge responded. The color climbed from the dull orange Tae-ho had been working at, through bright orange, into the yellow white that a forge can reach when everything is right, a hotter, steadier heat than that forge had ever held. I heard Tae-ho go still behind me. I've never gotten it that color, not once in 40 years. He didn't say it to me. He said it under his breath, half to himself, and I pretended not to hear it because that was the right thing to do. I worked my chisel stock in that heat, forged the body, drew the edge, refined the geometry, and when it was ready I brought the temperature up one final time and quenched it hard, the same as he had done. The steel came out hard, and then I put it back. This is the part he'd never been shown. I let the residual heat from the body bleed back toward the edge. The steel, cooling unevenly, changes color as the thin oxide layer thickens. It runs through a sequence as reliable as a clock if you know how to read it. Straw first, a pale yellow that means the edge is still too hard, still brittle. Then bronze, deepening, the color of old coins. Then blue, a faint iridescent wash, the color that means the hardness has been bled back to the point where the steel will flex before it fractures. I pulled it at the blue. You taught your hands to read the fire, I said. Nobody ever told you what the fire was doing. That's all this is. We cut stone. Tae-ho's chisel shattered on the third strike. The fracture was bright and granular, the same surface I'd seen on the broken spearheads in the mud by the wall. He stared at the pieces in his hand. Mine bit into the stone on the first strike and held. I worked it through the cut, 4 strikes, 5, feeling the edge track true, and set it down on the anvil face. Tae-ho said nothing for a long moment. He picked up my chisel and turned it over in his hands. His thumb found the edge, tested it carefully. Then he tapped the body of the chisel against the anvil, a single light tap, and listened. I'd braced for a fight. What I got was a master craftsman, 40 years deep, hearing for the first time that the craft went deeper still. The chisel rang, a clean, sustained note, the sound that properly tempered steel makes when it's struck, not the dull thud of soft iron, not the flat click of something over hard and about to fracture, but a bell tone that hangs in the air for a moment before it fades. It rings, Tae-ho said. His voice had changed. The territorial edge was gone. What was under it was something older and more serious. Mine never. He tapped it again, listening. It rings like a bell. He set the chisel down. He looked at the forge, then at me, then at the forge again. Outlander. He said it the way you say a title when you've decided to use it. You will teach me that, today. He gave me a hammer's place at his fire and clothes off his own back, his way of saying a thing he'd never say. The clothes were frontier work, heavy undyed hemp, a quilted jacket that smelled of charcoal and pine resin, leggings wrapped and tied in the manner of the settlement. Practical, warm, nothing that would catch on a tool or drag near a flame. He shoved the bundle at me without ceremony and jerked his chin toward the corner where I could change. You'll not work my fire dressed like a madman who fell out of the sky. If only he knew. I changed. The coveralls I folded and set aside. They were already scorched at one cuff from the anchor work, and they had no place here anymore. I didn't think about it too carefully. There was work to do. We spent the rest of the day at the forge. I walked him through the tempering sequence, the fire management first, because without the right heat the rest is guesswork, and then the quench, and then the careful reading of the running colors. Straw, bronze, blue. He had the eye for it already. He'd been reading heat his whole life. He just hadn't known there was a second reading to do. By the time the light outside had gone from afternoon gold to the flat gray of early evening, he had done it himself 3 times, and the third time he pulled the blade at exactly the right color, without any word from me. He held it up and looked at it. He didn't say anything, he set it in the rack with the others. That was enough. In the corner, where nobody ever looked, someone else was learning too. I noticed her the way you notice something at the edge of vision, a small figure, very still, in the shadows near the fuel stack. The orphan girl. Cho Yeong, I would learn later. She had a scrap of iron in her hands, a piece of waste stock no bigger than 2 fingers, and she was holding it at an angle that caught the forge light, watching the surface the way Tae-ho and I had been watching the running colors, mimicking the motion, practicing the reading with a cold piece of metal and the memory of what she'd seen. I looked away before she could notice me noticing. Some things you protect by not naming them. Night came down hard on the frontier. I was outside, checking the spearheads we'd retempered, 3 of them, the first batch, enough to prove the method before we scaled it, when I saw Warden Ji at the wall again. She was looking outward, toward the dark beyond the veil's pale margin, and I followed her line of sight. One of the anchor lights was guttering. I'd seen them from a distance before, those fixed points of pale radiance that marked the veil's anchoring points across the ridge. They'd seemed stable enough, the way a lamp seems stable until you notice the oil is low. This one was not stable. It pulsed twice, faint and irregular, and then it steadied again, but at a lower level than before. 1 fewer, or nearly. We had better steal now. We had days, maybe. Out on the dark edge of the world, the lights were still going out. Faster, Ji Wol-yeong said. She wasn't looking at me. She was still watching the distant light. Whatever he's building, it needs to be faster. The wind off the ridge carried pine and cold iron and the faint char smell of the forge behind me. I thought about the running colors, straw, bronze, blue, and about how much of what I needed to build still existed only as a sequence of steps in my head, each one waiting on the one before it. You cannot rush the colors. You can only have the fire ready when they come. I went back inside to work.